The soothing sounds of enslaved by owls. Bring us to tonight's tale. Hush, hush sound. Tonight's tale. It's a doozy. I am Pythagoras. This is a fairy tale. Tonight's tale is good bowling and card playing. And it begins with once upon a time there was an old king who had the most beautiful daughter in the world. One day he announced, "Whoever can keep watch in my old castle for 3 nights can have the princess for his bride." Now there was a young man from a poor family who thought to himself, "Hey, why not risk my life? I've got nothing to lose and a lot to win. What's there to think about?" So he appeared before the king and offered to keep watch in the castle for 3 nights. "You may request 3 things to take with you into the castle, but they have to be lifeless objects," the king said. "Well, I'd like to take a carpenter's bench with a knife, a lathe, and fire." All these things were carried into the castle for him. When it turned dark, he himself went inside. At first, everything was quiet. He built a fire, placed the carpenter's bench with the knife next to it, and sat down at the lathe. Toward midnight, however, a rumbling could be heard, first softly, then more loudly. Biff. Baff. Hey-hey. Holla-ho! It became more dreadful, and then it was somewhat quiet. Finally, a leg came down the chimney and stood right before him. "Hey there," the young man cried out. "How about some more? 1 is too little." The noise began once again. Another leg fell down the chimney, and then another, and another bump, until there were 9. "Hey, that's enough now. I've got enough for bowling. But there are no balls. Out with them." There was a tremendous uproar, and 2 skulls fell down the chimney. He put them in the lathe and turned them until they were smooth. "Now they'll roll much better." Then he did the same thing with the legs, and he set them up like bowling pins. "Hey, now I can have some fun." Suddenly 2 large black cats appeared and strode around the fire. "Meow! Meow!" they screeched. "We're freezing! We're freezing! Meow!" "You fools, what are you screaming about? Sit down by the fire and warm yourselves." After the cats had warmed themselves, they said, "Meow. Good fellow. We want to play a round of meow cards." "All right," he replied, "but show me your paws. You've got such long claws that I've got to give them a good clipping before we begin." Upon saying this, he grabbed them by the scruffs of their necks and lifted them to the carpenter's bench. Then he fastened them to the vise and petted them very nicely. He was extraordinarily nice. After being very nice to them, he carried them outside and put them next to a beautiful pond that was across from the castle. Just as he returned to the castle and wanted to settle down and warm himself by the fire, many black cats and dogs came out of every nook and cranny, more and more, so that he couldn't hide himself. They screamed. They stamped on the fire. They kicked it about so the fire went out. So he grabbed his carving knife and yelled, "Get out of here, you riffraff!" And then he began swinging the knife. Most of the cats and dogs ran away. The others were well groomed. And he carried them out and put them with the other animals next to the pond. Then he went back inside to the fire and blew the sparks, so the fire began again and he could warm himself. And after he had warmed himself, he was tired, and he lay down on a large bed that stood in a corner. Just as he wanted to fall asleep, the bed began to stir and raced around the entire castle. "Hey, that's fine with me. Just keep it up." So the bed drove around as though 6 horses were pulling it over stairs and landings. Bing, bang! It turned upside down, from top to bottom, and he was beneath it. So he flung the blankets and pillows into the air and jumped off. Anyone who wants a ride can have one. Then he lay down next to the fire until dawn. In the morning the king arrived, and when he saw the young man lying asleep, he thought he was dead and said, "What a shame." But then the young man heard these words, and he awoke, and as soon as he saw the king, he stood up, and the king asked him how things had gone during the night. "Oh, quite well. One night's gone by smoothly, and the other 2 will go by as well." Indeed, the other nights were just like the first, but he already knew what to do, so on the 4th day he was rewarded with the king's beautiful daughter. The end. Isn't it great that we didn't have to hear about him being nice to those animals another 2 nights? This has been another fairy tale. And now, a few more notes of grim darkness entering the background as Pythagoras bids you adieu.